How's it going? Jake with Bond Performance, part 2 of the 130,000 mile review, what broke. Got my 2016 Mk7 GTI here. I've owned since new. In the previous video, I had a couple people ask, so I guess I'll just go over it real quick. It's got an OEM IS38, DKM twin disc clutch, obviously my own Bond Performance GESI catted turbo back exhaust, and my V1 front mount intercooler, some BFI stage 2 mounts, engine short ram intake, and all the fun suspension mods, Bilstein coilovers, Super Pro, lower control arms, Stop Tech big brake kit, and some R32 brakes in the rear from a Mark V. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but that's the gist of it. The car has been flawless for 7 years. It's multiple trips to the tail on the back of the Dragon, some track day fun, both quarter mile and circuit track. Yeah, so if you watched the first video, you saw this thing start making some horrible noise. I've got, oh, it's kind of buried and it's in a box down there. I've got a Wave Track LSD I've had sitting on the shelf for a while for it. So regardless of what I find in there, the plan is to tear down the trans, or a trans if this trans is going to be more expensive to rebuild than just buying a good core. Either way, it's got to come completely apart. That'll be a video for another time. Today I'm just going to rip it apart and see what the carnage is. So don't mind my floofy beard. I'm going to get into it. Actually, before I get into it, I just want to mention I haven't always had a 2-post lift and a transmission jack, an engine support bar, and a big air-conditioned shop to work in. When I originally put this clutch in, it was on these 1980s jack stands. With a Craftsman floor jack. So don't be intimidated to work on your car just because you don't have a shop, just because you're not a professional mechanic like myself. It's just nuts and bolts. Obviously, be smart and safe about how you lift the vehicle, but there's no reason why the average car enthusiast with some good tech data and a decent set of tools can't knock something like this out. So yeah, don't be discouraged by the shop. It's totally unnecessary. I've done transmission jobs in my driveway, laying on the ground in the dark, in the rain. So yeah, here, we'll get started. Another quick thing, professional versus amateur: take your time and be organized. I just spent the last couple minutes clearing off this table from when I did the cylinder head on this truck. You want to start with a completely clean and clear workspace. You want to have boxes and bags and templates. This is going to be an outline of the bell housing to show the orientation of the bolts. The more organized you are taking things apart, the quicker you'll get done. So from someone inexperienced outside looking in, my wife might come out here and say, geez, you didn't get anything done. Believe me, the more prep you do before you start just ripping and tearing and piling stuff up and kicking around on the floor, the better. So just take a couple minutes to think through what you're doing and be methodical about the pattern you're going to take things apart. So I'm going to start up top with the battery, the ECU, the intake, the battery tray and intake tray, get all that out of the way. Transmission mount is going to wait until the very end, but I can go ahead and take the shift linkage and the upper bell housing bolts out, or at least loose, because eventually I'm going to put the engine support bar in the way up here. So just be thoughtful of how you're doing things so you don't kind of put yourself in a pinch. Another thing, if you don't have a big impact to get the axle bolts loose on the outside, you're going to want to do that while the car is still on the ground, because those get torqued to about 400 foot-pounds, which is way more than your average impact is going to be able to yeet right off of there. I've got the big M18 Milwaukee, but that hasn't always been the case. So having a big cheater bar and a breaker bar is going to come in clutch for that. You can even pop your center caps out and do it with the wheels on. That's actually how I torque them going back together. So yeah, this isn't going to be a full DIY, but just trying to point out some things that I've learned along the way over the last 20 years of working on stuff and the last 12 years of being an aircraft mechanic. So for the 15th time now I'm going to get started. So there was a broken spring clip on my bleeder block, so grabbed some out of my in-stock drawer over there, and I'm getting some bubbles out of it, so hopefully we're going to be done before we really get started and get away with just bleeding this thing, which would be awesome, because I really wasn't looking forward to turning wrenches all day. One more time.
Just pushing the clutch in.
Now you're in gear.
That's the clutch on the gear.
Is it in a gear?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead and kill it. Well, so much for it just being O-rings slash the broken spring clip that I found. I guess it's coming apart, unfortunately, after wasting a bunch of time exploring that. Alright, so just to show you real quick before I get the engine support bar in, got the shifter linkage out of the way. I've got all of the top bolts out. There's just 2 on the bottom. As long as you don't have all of the bolts out, it isn't going anywhere, because this transmission sits on dowel pins as well as the input shaft. So give yourself as much easy access as possible. In my case, I'll be pulling it from the bottom with it supported from the top, so I left 2 bolts down there just to retain it. These 6 are broken loose, so I'm going to hang the engine support bar in just a minute to show you how I organize the hardware. I'm not going to reuse that hardware, but that'll give me the pattern for the new stuff. As you can see, nice and organized with everything that's come off the car, bagged and tagged, covering orifices on the engine, make sure nothing inadvertently goes somewhere it'd be hard to retrieve. So yeah, let me get it set up and get this thing pulled out of here. Alright, so it's kind of a known issue with these early DKMs. It's been resolved since, but the innermost clutch disc doesn't fully engage the spline. Why am I having such a hard time focusing on this? Let me try again. There we go, now we're in focus. So the innermost disc of the twin disc wiped out the input shaft of the trans. So basically, unless I do some research and somehow find somebody who's selling an input shaft for a lot less than I've seen them go for, it's junkyard trans time, even if I'm going to install my LSD, because the input shaft and the rebuild kit costs more than a whole junkyard trans with low miles, so cost prohibitive to do that. So if my wife ever watched YouTube, this would be the part where she started feeling sick, because this is just money for nothing. You can see the carnage on the inner disc there.
There's no chicks for free.
No chicks for free. Wow, this is just not focusing well at all. Yep, so there's the old flywheel. It's got some heat spots on it, but no actual grooves worn in it. Still got the marks from me marking the torque spec on it. Discs still have life on them. It just sounded terrible because it was a very expensive lathe chewing the teeth off this disc. So, design flaw by DKM. I They say they've revised. I already called them before I even got a chance to look at the car, the day after it started making the noise, to ask them about what it would cost to have this twin disc rebuilt if I sent it back to them. They said $400 to $500 depending on how bad it was. They also said that, well, I went out of my way to ask, and they reported back that these pressure plate bolts are a new revision, because that was a huge complaint when these clutches first came out, that they're dead soft. As you can see from the metal chips, I had to drill the heads off a couple of them to get them out.